There is a moment that comes for certain people, not everyone, not those who sleepwalk through their lives, but for the ones who feel too much, who question too deeply, who sense there must be something more than this. There comes a night so dark that even the idea of morning seems like a lie. You may be in that night right now. Not the darkness that comes from bad circumstances, not the pain that has an obvious cause. This is something else entirely. This is the slow, crushing realization that everything you believed about yourself, everything you built, every role you played, every mask you wore, all of it is beginning to crack. And beneath the cracks there is nothing, just emptiness, just silence, just the terrifying question you have been running from your entire life. Who am I really? Carl Jung called this the dark night of the soul, and he spent more years studying this phenomenon than almost any other aspect of human psychology, not because it was rare, but because it was the most important threshold a human being can cross. The doorway that separates a life lived on autopilot from a life that is truly, devastatingly, magnificently awake. What most people get wrong, what your friends will tell you, what conventional wisdom will whisper, is that this darkness is depression, that you need to medicate it away, distract yourself from it, push through it with positive thinking and productivity hacks. But Jung discovered something that contradicts all of that mainstream advice. He discovered that this darkness is not your enemy. It is not a malfunction. It is not a chemical imbalance or a sign that something has gone wrong with your brain. The dark night of the soul is the psyche's final, desperate attempt to wake you up before it is too late. And what Jung discovered about navigating this darkness, about the specific stages, the unmistakable signs, the hidden purpose of every moment of crushing despair, is what we are going to walk through together in this video. Stay with this, because if you are in this night right now, what comes next may be the only thing you actually need to hear. Carl Jung spent decades in the most intimate possible relationship with human suffering. He did not sit in an office and hand out prescriptions. He sat with people in the grip of visions that terrified them. He listened to dreams that revealed ancient symbols his patients had never consciously learned. He descended into his own unconscious so deliberately, so thoroughly, that for a period of years he was not sure he would find his way back. And at the center of all that work, he kept encountering the same phenomenon. Brilliant, sensitive, searching people, people who had done everything right by society's standards, would suddenly find themselves in a state of collapse. Their old motivations stopped working. Their relationships felt hollow. Their achievements rang empty. The very personality they had constructed over decades began to feel like a costume they had forgotten they were wearing. Modern psychology often labels this as depression, burnout, a midlife crisis, an existential threat. Jung called it something else entirely. He called it the necessary death of the ego before the true self could emerge. He discovered that the dark night is not random. It follows a pattern. It has distinct stages. It has unmistakable signs that appear before the breakthrough. And most importantly, most revolutionary of all, Jung discovered that the people who understood what was happening to them, who recognized the darkness as a process of transformation rather than a disease to be cured, navigated it entirely differently than those who fought against it. The ones who fought it got stuck, sometimes for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives. The ones who surrendered to it not as victims but as initiates entering a sacred process emerged on the other side as people they barely recognized, more whole, more real, more alive than they had ever been. Today, I am going to give you the 7 signs Carl Jung identified that signal you are not breaking down. You are breaking through. These are the markers that separate a psychological crisis from a spiritual awakening. If you recognize even 3 of these signs in your own experience right now, understand this. You are not lost. You are being found. Drop 777 in the comments if what you just heard stirred something in you that you have not been able to name. Then tell me, which of these 7 signs do you recognize first? The first sign of the dark night, according to Jung, is the collapse of meaning itself, not sadness, not anxiety, something deeper and more disorienting. The activities that once gave you purpose now feel like exercises in futility. The goals you pursued for years suddenly look like elaborate distractions. The very framework of your life, why you do what you do, begins to dissolve. Jung described this as the moment when the persona, the mask we wear for society, begins to crack. And when that mask cracks, we are forced to look beneath it. And what we find is terrifying. We have no idea who we are without the roles we play. The achiever who defined herself through success, the caregiver who existed only through service, the rebel whose identity was built entirely on opposition. When the dark night arrives, these constructed selves stop working, not because circumstances have changed, but because the psyche has decided, at the deepest level, that it will no longer tolerate a life that is not authentically lived. This is where most people panic. They try to rebuild the old meaning. They double down on work. They chase new relationships. They buy things, accomplish things, pursue things with even greater desperation. Jung watched this happen again and again, and he warned that this frantic reconstruction is the very thing that prolongs the darkness. Because the meaning that is dying needed to die. It was never real meaning. It was borrowed meaning, inherited meaning, meaning you absorbed from your parents, your culture, your religion, your peer group, without ever stopping to ask whether it was actually yours. Jung's radical instruction for this stage is simple in concept and devastating in practice. Let it die. Do not rush to rebuild. Do not paste over the emptiness with new distractions. Sit in the meaninglessness. Allow the old structure to fully collapse, because only when the false foundation is completely cleared can the true foundation begin to emerge. This is not passive resignation. This is active surrender to a process wiser than your conscious mind. If you are in this first stage right now, if nothing makes sense anymore, if you cannot remember why you ever cared about the things that used to drive you, I want you to hear this with everything you have. The fact that meaning has collapsed means you were living on borrowed meaning. And the fact that borrowed meaning no longer works is the first sign that something authentic is trying to be born in you. Drop 111 in the comments if you have felt this collapse of meaning. What was the first thing you realized had stopped mattering to you? The second sign Jung identified is the eruption of everything you have suppressed, the emotions you deemed unacceptable, the desires you buried, the anger you swallowed, the grief you never allowed yourself to feel, the parts of yourself you labeled not me and exiled to the basement of your psyche. Jung called this the return of the shadow, and he said it arrives precisely when the persona cracks, because the persona's job was to keep the shadow hidden. When the mask breaks, the repressed material floods upward. You may find yourself suddenly furious at people you thought you had forgiven. You may feel sexual desires that contradict your self-image. You may remember events from childhood with a clarity that rewrites your entire narrative. You may feel violent, ugly, petty, jealous, cruel emotions you did not think you were capable of. Most people at this stage believe they are becoming worse, that the darkness is corrupting them. Jung said the opposite is true. You are not becoming worse. You are finally seeing what has been there all along. The shadow does not arrive to destroy you. It arrives to be integrated. Every aspect of yourself that you rejected is demanding to be reclaimed. Jung was absolutely clear about this. The goal is not to act out every shadow impulse. The goal is to acknowledge it, to bring it into conscious relationship with the rest of your personality. The man who denies his aggression becomes passive-aggressive and spiritually rigid. The woman who denies her selfishness becomes a resentful martyr. The person who integrates their shadow becomes whole. This stage of the dark night feels like you are falling apart because, in a very real sense, you are. The self you constructed, the nice self, the spiritual self, the together self, the successful self, was partially a lie. And lies cannot survive the dark night. The emotional intensity of this stage can be overwhelming. Dreams become vivid and disturbing. Old memories surface unbidden. You may find yourself weeping for reasons you cannot explain, or raging at minor frustrations with a ferocity that frightens you. Jung's guidance here is counterintuitive. Welcome it. The shadow returns because you are finally strong enough to face it. The very fact that these buried aspects are surfacing means your psyche trusts you with the truth now. It did not before. It kept you asleep because waking up would have destroyed you. Now you are ready. Difficult as this is, it is a sign of growth, not regression. Leave 11 in the comments if you have felt your shadow returning. What part of yourself have you been most afraid to acknowledge? The third sign that Jung identified is perhaps the most socially disruptive, an overwhelming physical need to be alone. Not loneliness, not isolation imposed by circumstance. A positive, fierce, almost biological craving for solitude. You may find yourself canceling plans you used to enjoy, declining invitations that once excited you, feeling an almost allergic reaction to small talk, social performance, and the endless negotiation of other people's expectations. The idea of explaining yourself to anyone feels exhausting beyond measure. This is not depression-induced withdrawal. Jung was careful to distinguish between the two. Depression pulls you into isolation with a sense of shame and paralysis. The dark night's call to solitude is different. It is purposeful, almost urgent. It feels like your soul is literally dragging you away from the crowd so that the real work can happen in private. Jung understood this because he lived it. During his own dark night, the years he called his confrontation with the unconscious, he spent hours every day in his study, writing, painting, listening to the figures that emerged from his own depths. He withdrew from professional obligations. He reduced his social circle to a tiny handful of people who could meet him at the depth he required. And he documented something crucial. The solitude of the dark night is not empty. It is extraordinarily full. When you strip away the noise of other people's expectations, your own inner world becomes louder, richer, more vivid. Dreams become more memorable. Intuitions become sharper. The symbolic language of your unconscious, images, synchronicities, sudden knowings becomes impossible to ignore. Society will not understand this need. Your friends will think you are depressed. Your family will worry. Well-meaning people will try to draw you back into social circulation. Jung's advice is unambiguous. Protect your solitude during this stage as if your life depends on it, because it does. The inner work of the dark night cannot be performed in public. It requires a space where you do not have to perform, explain, or manage anyone else's reaction to your process. This solitude is the chrysalis stage, and chrysalises are not pretty. They are dark, motionless, and completely enclosed, but without that enclosure, the transformation cannot occur. If you are craving solitude with an intensity that feels almost primal, if the idea of one more social obligation makes you want to scream, this is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is sign number 3 that you are in the sacred process of the dark night. Honor it. Defend it. The people who truly love you will understand when you emerge. The fourth sign Jung identified is the most mysterious, the most difficult to describe, and in many ways the most important. You begin to realize that darkness is not merely the absence of light. It is an active, purposeful, intelligent force in its own right. This sounds mystical. Jung was aware of that, but he arrived at this conclusion through decades of clinical observation, not through philosophy or spirituality. He watched patient after patient move through the dark night and noticed something remarkable. The darkness itself seemed to be working on them, transforming them, breaking down old structures and building new ones, often without the patient's conscious participation. Jung studied alchemy extensively, not because he believed you could turn lead into gold in a laboratory, but because he recognized that the alchemists were describing in symbolic language the exact same process he was observing in his patients. The alchemical nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the descent into primal chaos, was not a failure of the process. It was a necessary stage. In the Negrido, the original material is reduced to prima materia, the raw, undifferentiated stuff from which something genuinely new can emerge. You cannot skip this stage. There is no spiritual bypass around the blackness. The affirmations will not work here. The positive thinking will not work here. The manifestation techniques will not work here. This stage requires something far more radical: trust. Trust that the darkness is doing something, even when you cannot see what, even when every indication suggests you are simply falling apart. Jung discovered that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own organic wisdom, and that wisdom operates in darkness as skillfully as a seed operates underground. The seed does not know it is becoming a tree. It only knows pressure, darkness, and dissolution. And yet, from that very dissolution, the tree emerges. Jung would say, "You are the seed right now." And the fact that you cannot feel yourself becoming anything is precisely the proof that the transformation is underway. This is the stage where many people seek to escape, through addiction, through frantic activity, through spiritual bypassing that pretends everything is fine when nothing is fine. Jung was ruthless about this. Any attempt to avoid the Negrido prolongs it. The only way out is through. The only way to dawn is through the darkest hour. Drop 33 in the comments if you have experienced this alchemical darkness. Tell me, what old version of yourself is being dissolved right now? The fifth sign of the dark night is one of the most validating and yet most disorienting. The world around you begins to speak in symbols. Jung called this synchronicity, the acausal connection between inner psychological events and outer physical events. Meaningful coincidences that are too precise, too timely, too emotionally charged to be dismissed as random. You think of someone you have not seen in years, and they call you that afternoon. You have a dream about a particular animal, and you see 3 representations of that animal the next day. You are wrestling with a life decision, and a book falls open to exactly the passage you needed to read. You ask the universe a question, and the answer arrives through a stranger's chance remark. These synchronicities are not your imagination. Jung investigated them with scientific rigor throughout his career. He collaborated with physicists. He documented hundreds of cases, and he concluded that during periods of deep psychological transformation, particularly during the dark night, the boundary between the inner world and the outer world becomes more permeable. The unconscious is not merely inside you. In some way that defies conventional understanding, the unconscious seems to extend beyond the individual psyche and into the fabric of reality itself. During the dark night, you become sensitive to this extended field in ways you never were before. This can feel like losing your grip on reality, and in a sense, you are, but not in the way mental illness means. You are losing your grip on one version of reality, the dead, mechanical, purely material worldview you inherited from a culture that forgot the symbolic dimension of existence. And you are gaining access to a different version of reality, one that is alive, responsive, meaningful, and in mysterious dialogue with your inner process. Jung cautioned against 2 errors here. The first is to dismiss synchronicities as mere coincidence, a defense mechanism used by people terrified that reality might be more mysterious than their rational worldview allows. The second is to become inflated by them, to believe you have been specially chosen or that you possess secret knowledge. Neither extreme serves the process. The balanced approach is to treat synchronicities as what they are, messages from the deeper intelligence of life, confirming that your inner transformation is real, reflected in the outer world, and supported by forces you do not fully understand. Note them, reflect on them, but do not cling to them. They will fade when their purpose has been served. Their job is to keep you moving through the night. The 6th sign is the one Jung considered the centerpiece of the entire process. The direct encounter with what he called the self, the innermost core of your being, the archetype of wholeness, the divine image within. In the depths of the dark night, after the ego has been sufficiently dismantled, something remarkable begins to happen. You catch glimpses of a presence within yourself that feels older, wiser, and more complete than your ordinary personality. It may appear in dreams as a guiding figure, a wise old man, a radiant woman, a divine child, a sacred animal. Jung called these numinous experiences encounters with a reality that transcends the personal ego. For some people, this encounter comes gradually, a series of small recognitions that build over time. For others, it arrives in a single overwhelming moment that changes everything. But however it appears, the encounter with the self carries an unmistakable signature. You feel known, not judged, not evaluated, not found wanting, simply, completely, unconditionally known. This is the turning point of the dark night. Not because the darkness ends, it may continue for some time, but because you now know, with a certainty that transcends logic, that you are not alone in it. That there is something within you, or something that contains you, that is wise enough, strong enough, and loving enough to hold you through the dissolution. Jung was often accused of mysticism when he spoke about the self. He insisted he was being empirical. He had watched too many people encounter this inner reality to dismiss it, and he noted that people who made contact with the self during their dark night navigated the remaining stages with a patience and trust that others could not muster. The self does not rescue you from the darkness. It teaches you how to walk through it. It provides no easy answers. Instead, it provides something far more valuable, the felt sense that the process itself is meaningful, that your suffering is not wasted, that every moment of dissolution is simultaneously a moment of reorganization toward a more authentic wholeness. If you have felt this presence, even for a fleeting moment, you have encountered what Jung considered the most important experience a human being can have. Not wealth, not fame, not romantic love, the encounter with your own deepest nature. The seventh and final sign is the emergence of something new, not a return to the old self. That self is gone, and trying to reconstruct it is futile. Something genuinely new, a personality that feels more integrated, more authentic, more capable of both strength and vulnerability. Jung called this process individuation, becoming the specific, unique individual you were always meant to be, distinct from the collective expectations, the borrowed identities, the inherited scripts. The new self that emerges from the dark night has several recognizable characteristics. First, it is no longer dependent on external validation, not because it has become arrogant or isolated, but because it has found something within itself that is more reliable than other people's opinions. Second, it has made peace with its own darkness. The shadow has not been destroyed, it can never be destroyed, but it has been integrated. The person who emerges knows their own capacity for cruelty, selfishness, and destruction, and having acknowledged it, no longer needs to deny it through rigid moralism or project it onto others. Third, the new self is marked by what Jung called religious attitude, not adherence to any particular religion, but a fundamental orientation toward life as something meaningful, purposeful, and ultimately trustworthy. Even when circumstances are difficult, even when the darkness returns in smaller forms as it always does. And fourth, perhaps most surprisingly, the new self is simpler, less complicated, less performative. The elaborate defenses, the strategic presentations, the constant management of image have simply fallen away. What remains is something quieter, more direct, more real. This birth does not happen all at once. Jung compared individuation to the journey of the sun. It has its dawn, its noon, its twilight, and its return to darkness. The dark night is not the end of struggle. It is the transformation of struggle into something meaningful. The same challenges that would have destroyed the old self become opportunities for the new self to deepen, to grow, to become ever more itself. If you have begun to feel the first stirrings of this new self, if something in you feels different, quieter, more solid in a way you cannot quite explain, then the dark night has done its work. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough for you to know that the process was worth it, that every moment of despair was simultaneously a moment of preparation, that the you who is emerging was being built in the very darkness you feared would destroy you. Drop 528 in the comments if you have felt the birth of this new self. What feels different about you now compared to who you were before? Carl Jung left us a map through the territory that every deeply lived human life must eventually cross. The dark night of the soul is not a punishment. It is not a mistake. It is not evidence that you have failed or that God has abandoned you or that the universe is cruel. It is the necessary death that makes genuine life possible. The person you were had to die so that the person you are becoming could have room to grow. That death is painful beyond description. It feels like losing everything because, in a very real sense, you are. You are losing everything that was never truly yours to begin with. Every borrowed identity, every performed role, every adaptation you made to survive in a world that demanded you be someone other than who you actually are. And in the space cleared by that loss, something authentic begins to grow. Slowly, quietly, without fanfare, the way all real growth happens. Your body has never lied to you. Every symptom of this dark night, the loss of meaning, the return of the shadow, the need for solitude, the encounter with the self, was never malfunction. It was initiation. The only question was whether you were ready to understand it as such. You are not broken. You are becoming whole. Place your hand on your heart right now. Feel that steady rhythm, that heartbeat that has carried you through every moment of this darkness without once abandoning you. Whisper to it if you can, "Thank you for holding on. I am almost through, and I am not going anywhere without you." Because the moment true transformation begins is not when the darkness ends. It is when you stop fighting the darkness and start trusting what it is making of you. That moment can be this one. If Carl Jung's map through the dark night helped you understand your own journey more clearly, subscribe to Jung Unveiled and walk this path with us. And in the comments, tell me which of these 7 signs landed deepest in your heart right now. The part of you that is still in darkness is listening to every word you write. What will you say to it?